Chapter 8 of She. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Icy Jumbo. She, by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 8. The Feast and After. On the day following this remarkable scene, a scene calculated to make a deep impression upon anybody who beheld it, more because of what it suggested and seemed to foreshadow than of what it revealed, it was announced to us that a feast would be held that evening in our honour. I did my best to get out of it, saying that we were modest people and cared little for feasts, but my remarks being received with the silence of displeasure, I thought it wisest to hold my tongue. Accordingly, just before sundown, I was informed that everything was ready, and, accompanied by Job, went into the cave where I met Leo, who was as usual followed by Ustane. These two had been out walking somewhere, and knew nothing of the projected festivity till that moment. When Ustane heard of it, I saw an expression of horror spring up upon her handsome features. Turning, she caught a man who was passing up the cave by the arm, and asked him something in an imperious tone. His answer seemed to reassure her a little, for she looked relieved, though far from satisfied. Next she appeared to attempt some remonstrance with the man, who was a person in authority, but he spoke angrily to her and shook her off, and then, changing his mind, led her by the arm and sat her down between himself and another man in the circle round the fire, and I perceived that for some reason of her own she thought it best to submit. The fire in the cave was an unusually big one that night, and in a large circle round it were gathered about 35 men and 2 women. Ustane and the woman, to avoid whom Job had played the role of another scriptural character. The men were sitting in perfect silence, as was their custom, each with his great spear stuck upright behind him in a socket cut in the rock for that purpose. Only 1 or 2 wore the yellowish linen garment of which I have spoken. The rest had nothing on except the leopard skin about the middle. "What's up now, sir?" said Job doubtfully. "Bless us and save us, there's that woman again. Now, surely, she can't be after me, seeing that I have given her no encouragement. They give me the creeps, the whole lot of them, and that's a fact. Why, look, they have asked Mohammed to dine too. There, that lady of mine is talking to him in as nice and civil a way as possible. Well, I'm glad it isn't me, that's all." We looked up, and sure enough the woman in question had risen, and was escorting the wretched Mohammed from his corner, where, overcome by some acute prescience of horror, he had been seated, shivering and calling on Allah. He appeared unwilling enough to come, if for no other reason perhaps because it was an unaccustomed honour, for hitherto his food had been given to him apart. Anyway, I could see he was in a state of great terror, for his tottering legs would scarcely support his stout, bulky form, and I think it was rather owing to the resources of barbarism behind him, in the shape of a huge Amahagga with a proportionately huge spear, than to the seductions of the lady who led him by the hand, that he consented to come at all. "Well," I said to the others, "I don't at all like the look of things, but I suppose that we must face it out. Have you fellows got your revolvers on? Because, if so, you had better see that they are loaded." "I have, sir," said Job, tapping his colt, "but Mr. Leo has only got his hunting knife, though that is big enough, surely." Feeling that it would not do to wait while the missing weapon was fetched, we advanced boldly, and seated ourselves in a line, with our backs against the side of the cave. As soon as we were seated, an earthenware jar was passed round, containing a fermented fluid, of by no means unpleasant taste, though apt to turn upon the stomach, made from crushed grain, not Indian corn, but a small brown grain that grows upon its stem in clusters, not unlike that which in the southern part of Africa is known by the name of Kaffir corn. The vase which contained this liquor was very curious, and as it more or less resembled many hundreds of others in use among the Amahagga, I may as well describe it. These vases are of a very ancient manufacture, and of all sizes. None such can have been made in the country for hundreds, or rather thousands of years. They are found in the rock tombs, of which I shall give a description in their proper place, and my own belief is that, after the fashion of the Egyptians, with whom the former inhabitants of this country may have had some connection, they were used to receive the viscera of the dead. Leo, however, is of the opinion that, as in the case of the Etruscan amphorae, they were placed there for the spiritual use of the deceased. They are mostly two-handled, and of all sizes, some being nearly 3 feet in height, and running from that down to as many inches. In shape they vary, but all are exceedingly beautiful and graceful, being made of a very fine black ware, not lustrous, but slightly rough. On this groundwork are inlaid figures much more graceful and lifelike than any others that I have seen on antique vases. Some of these inlaid pictures represent love scenes with a childlike simplicity and freedom of manner which would not commend itself to the taste of the present day. Others again give pictures of maidens dancing, and yet others of hunting scenes. For instance, the very vase from which we were then drinking had on one side a most spirited drawing of men, apparently white in colour, attacking a bull elephant with spears, while on the reverse was a picture, not quite so well done, of a hunter shooting an arrow at a running antelope, I should say from the look of it either an eland or a kudu. This is a digression at a critical moment, but it is not too long for the occasion itself was very long. With the exception of the periodical passing of the vase, and the movement necessary to throw fuel onto the fire, nothing happened for the best part of a whole hour. Nobody spoke a word. There we were, all sat in perfect silence, staring at the glare and glow of the large fire, and at the shadows thrown by the flickering earthenware lamps, which, by the way, were not ancient. On the open space between us and the fire lay a large wooden tray, with 4 short handles to it, exactly like a butcher's tray, only not hollowed out. By the side of the tray was a great pair of long-handled iron pincers, and on the other side of the fire was a similar pair. Somehow I did not at all like the appearance of this tray and the accompanying pincers. There I sat and stared at them, and at the silent circle of the fierce, moody faces of the men, and reflected that it was all very awful, and that we were absolutely in the power of this alarming people, who, to me at any rate, were all the more formidable because their true character was still very much of a mystery to us. They might be better than I thought them, or they might be worse. I feared that they were worse, and I was not wrong. It was a curious sort of feast, I reflected, in appearance, indeed, an entertainment of the Barmecide stamp, for there was absolutely nothing to eat. At last, just as I was beginning to feel as though I were being mesmerized, a move was made. Without the slightest warning, a man from the other side of the circle called out in a loud voice, "Where is the flesh that we shall eat?" Thereon everybody in the circle answered in a deep, measured tone, and stretching out the right arm towards the fire as he spoke, "The flesh will come." "Is it a goat?" said the same man. "It is a goat without horns, and more than a goat, and we shall slay it," they answered with one voice, and turning half round, they one and all grasped the handles of their spears with the right hand, and then simultaneously let them go. "Is it an ox?" said the man again. "It is an ox without horns, and more than an ox, and we shall slay it," was the answer, and again the spears were grasped, and again let go. Then came a pause, and I noticed with horror and a rising of the hair that the woman next to Mohammed began to fondle him, patting his cheeks and calling him by names of endearment, while her fierce eyes played up and down his trembling form. I do not know why the sight frightened me so, but it did frighten us all dreadfully, especially Leo. The caressing was so snake-like, and so evidently a part of some ghastly formula that had to be gone through. Footnote, signed by the author. We afterwards learnt that its object was to pretend to the victim that he was the object of love and admiration, and so to soothe his injured feelings, and cause him to expire in a happy and contented frame of mind. End of footnote. I saw Mohammed turn white under his brown skin, sickly white with fear. "Is the meat ready to be cooked?" asked the voice more rapidly. "It is ready, it is ready." "Is the pot hot to cook it?" it continued, in a sort of scream that echoed painfully down the great recesses of the cave, "It is hot! It is hot!" "Great heavens!" roared Leo. "Remember the writing! The people who place pots upon the heads of strangers!" As he said the words, before we could stir, or even take the matter in, two great ruffians jumped up, and seizing the long pincers, thrust them into the heart of the fire, and the woman who had been caressing Mohammed suddenly produced a fibre noose from under her girdle or mucha, and slipping it over his shoulders, ran it tight, while the men next to him seized him by the legs. The two men with the pincers gave a heave, and, scattering the fire this way and that upon the rocky floor, lifted from it a large earthenware pot, heated to a white heat. In an instant, almost with a single movement, they had reached the spot where Mohammed was struggling. He fought like a fiend, shrieking in the abandonment of his despair, and notwithstanding the noose round him and the efforts of the men who held his legs, the advancing wretches were for the moment unable to accomplish their purpose, which, horrible and incredible as it seems, was to put the red-hot pot upon his head. I sprang to my feet with a yell of horror, and drawing my revolver, fired it by a sort of instinct straight at the diabolical woman who had been caressing Mohammed, and was now gripping him in her arms. The bullet struck her in the back and killed her, and to this day I am glad that it did, for as it afterwards transpired, she had availed herself of the anthropophagous customs of the Amahagga to organise the whole thing in revenge of the slight put upon her by Job. She sank down dead, and as she did so, to my terror and dismay, Mohammed, by a superhuman effort, burst from his tormentors, and springing high into the air, fell dying upon her corpse. The heavy bullet from my pistol had driven through the bodies of both, at once striking down the murderess, and saving her victim from a death 100 times more horrible. It was an awful and yet a most merciful accident. For a moment there was a silence of astonishment. The Amahagga had never heard the report of a firearm before, and its effects dismayed them. But the next, a man close to us recovered himself, and seized his spear preparatory to making a lunge with it at Leo, who was nearest to him. "Run for it!" I shouted, setting the example by starting up the cave as hard as my legs would carry me. I would have made for the open air if it had been possible, but there were men in the way, and, besides, I had caught sight of the forms of a crowd of people standing out clear against the skyline beyond the entrance to the cave. Up the cave I went, and after me came the others, and after them thundered the whole crowd of cannibals, mad with fury at the death of the woman. With a bound I cleared the prostrate form of Mohammed. As I flew over him, I felt the heat from the red-hot pot which was lying close by strike upon my legs, and by its glow saw his hands, for he was not quite dead, still feebly moving. At the top of the cave was a little platform of rock, 3 feet or so high, by about 8 deep, on which 2 large lamps were placed at night. Whether this platform had been left as a seat, or as a raised point afterwards to be cut away when it had served its purpose as a standing place from which to carry on the excavations, I do not know. At least I did not then. At any rate, we all 3 reached it, and jumping on it, prepared to sell our lives as dearly as we could. For a few seconds the crowd that was pressing on our heels hung back when they saw us face round upon them. Job was on one side of the rock to the left, Leo in the centre, and I to the right. Behind us were the lamps. Leo bent forward and looked down the long lane of shadows, terminating in the fire and lighted lamps, through which the quiet forms of our would-be murderers flitted to and fro, with the faint light glinting on their spears, for even their fury was silent as a bulldog's. The only other thing visible was the red-hot pot, still glowing angrily in the gloom. There was a curious light in Leo's eyes, and his handsome face was set like a stone. In his right hand was his heavy hunting knife. He shifted its thong a little up his wrist, and then put his arm round me and gave me a good hug. "Good-bye, old fellow," he said, "my dear friend, my more than father. We have no chance against these scoundrels. They will finish us in a few minutes, and eat us afterwards, I suppose. Good-bye. I led you into this. I hope you will forgive me. Good-bye, Job." "God's will be done," I said, setting my teeth, as I prepared for the end. At that moment With an exclamation, Job lifted his revolver and fired, and hit a man. Not the man he aimed at, by the way. Anything that Job shot at was perfectly safe. On they came with a rush, and I fired too as fast as I could, and checked them. Between us, Job and I, besides the woman, killed or mortally wounded 5 men with our pistols before they were emptied. But we had no time to reload, and they still came on in a way that was almost splendid in its recklessness, seeing that they did not know but that we could go on firing forever. A great fellow bounded up upon the platform, and Leo struck him dead with one blow of his powerful arm, sending the knife right through him. I did the same by another, but Job missed his stroke, and I saw a brawny Amahagger grip him by the middle and whirl him off the rock. The knife, not being secured by a thong, fell from Job's hand as he did so, and by a most happy accident for him, lit upon its handle on the rock, just as the body of the Amahagger, who was undermost, struck upon its point and was transfixed upon it. What happened to Job after that, I am sure I do not know, but my own impression is that he lay still upon the corpse of his deceased assailant, playing possum, as the Americans say. As for myself, I was soon involved in a desperate encounter with 2 ruffians, who, luckily for me, had left their spears behind them, and for the first time in my life the great physical power with which nature has endowed me stood me in good stead. I had hacked at the head of one man with my hunting knife, which was almost as big and heavy as a short sword, with such vigour that the sharp steel had split his skull down to the eyes, and was held so fast by it that, as he suddenly fell sideways, the knife was twisted right out of my hand. Then it was that the 2 others sprang upon me. I saw them coming, and got an arm round the waist of each, and down we all fell upon the floor of the cave together, rolling over and over. They were strong men, but I was mad with rage, and that awful lust for slaughter which will creep into the hearts of the most civilized of us when blows are flying, and life and death tremble on the turn. My arms were round the 2 swarthy demons, and I hugged them till I heard their ribs crack and crunch up beneath my grip. They twisted and writhed like snakes, and clawed and battered at me with their fists, but I held on. Lying on my back there, so that their bodies might protect me from spear thrusts from above, I slowly crushed the life out of them, and as I did so, strange as it may seem, I thought of what the amiable head of my college at Cambridge, who is a member of the Peace Society, and my brother fellows would say, if by clairvoyance they could see me, of all men, playing such a bloody game. Soon my assailants grew faint, and almost ceased to struggle. Their breath had failed them, and they were dying, but still I dared not leave them, for they died very slowly. I knew that if I relaxed my grip, they would revive. The other ruffians probably thought, for we were all 3 lying in the shadow of the ledge, that we were all dead together. At any rate, they did not interfere with our little tragedy. I turned my head, and as I lay gasping in the throes of that awful struggle, I could see that Leo was off the rock now, for the lamplight fell full upon him. He was still on his feet, but in the centre of a surging mass of struggling men, who were striving to pull him down as wolves pull down a stag. Up above them towered his beautiful pale face, crowned with its bright curls, for Leo is 6'2" high, and I saw that he was fighting with a desperate abandonment and energy that was at once splendid and hideous to behold. He drove his knife through one man. They were so close to and mixed up with him that they could not get at him to kill him with their big spears, and they had no knives or sticks. The man fell, and then somehow the knife was wrenched from his hand, leaving him defenceless, and I thought that the end had come. But no, with a desperate effort he broke loose from them, seized the body of the man he had just slain, and lifting it high in the air, hurled it right at the mob of his assailants, so that the shock and weight of it swept some 5 or 6 of them to the earth. But in a minute they were all up again, except one whose skull was smashed, and had once more fastened upon him, and then slowly, with infinite labour and struggling, the wolves bore the lion down. Once even then he recovered himself, and felled an Amahagger with his fist, but it was more than man could do to hold his own for long against so many, and at last he came crashing down upon the rock floor, falling as an oak falls, and bearing with him to earth all those who clung about him. They gripped him by his arms and legs, and then cleared off his body. "A spear!" cried a voice. "A spear to cut his throat, and a vessel to catch his blood!" I shut my eyes, for I saw the man coming with a spear, and myself I could not stir to Leo's help, for I was growing weak, and the two men on me were not yet dead, and a deadly sickness overcame me. Then suddenly there was a disturbance, and involuntarily I opened my eyes again, and looked towards the scene of murder. The girl Ustane had thrown herself on Leo's prostrate form, covering his body with her body, and fastening her arms about his neck. They tried to drag her from him, but she twisted her legs round his, and hung on like a bulldog, or rather like a creeper to a tree, and they could not. Then they tried to stab him in the side without hurting her, but somehow she shielded him, and he was only wounded. At last they lost patience. "Drive the spear through the man and the woman together," said the voice, the same voice that had asked the questions at that ghastly feast. "So of a verity shall they be wed." Then I saw the man with the weapon straighten himself for the effort. I saw the cold steel gleam on high, and once more I shut my eyes. As I did so, I heard the voice of a man thunder out in tones that rang and echoed down the rocky ways. "Cease!" Then I fainted, and as I did so, it flashed through my darkening mind that I was passing down into the last oblivion of death. End of chapter 8.